This is the Juki HZL-DX5. The reason it grabbed me right away is simple. My stitches looked clean and professional without me babysitting tension and settings the whole time. I see this as a computerized home sewing machine, built for people who sew regularly, and want that steady, nearly industrial feeling without turning their room into a workshop. I like it for clothing, quilting, and everyday projects where consistency matters. It also works well as a step up from a basic mechanical machine if someone wants more control without adding stress to the learning curve. The design is familiar in a good way. It has a classic rectangular body with gentle curves, a solid white shell, and a clear display that shows only what I actually need at a glance. The control buttons are large and have a satisfying click, so I never wonder if I press something. There is bright, even lighting over the needle area, which makes a big difference when I am top-stitching dark fabric or sewing at night. The footprint sits nicely on my small sewing table, and the hard carrying case does make storage and occasional travel easier, even though this is not a machine I want to carry every weekend. It feels sturdy when I move it. I expect it heavy and awkward, but it is more manageable than it looks. Still, it is not feather light. I would call it confident on the table and a workout if I need to lift it from room to room. My first setup was low stress. The manual is direct and readable, and the layout of the machine helps. I wound a bobbin, dropped it into the easy bobbin system, and loved that I could see how much thread was left through the clear cover. Threading from spool to needle is well guided. The automatic needle threader is a highlight for me most of the time. It saves my eyes and speeds up the start of every project. I have noticed it can feel a little fussy if the needle is not perfectly at its highest point, or if I use very fine thread. But once I learned to tap the needle up button before threading, it worked reliably. The start and stop button is there if I want to sew without the foot pedal, and the speed slider gives me tighter control when I am teaching myself a new technique or working with a tricky fabric. Once I started stitching, the character of the machine showed up fast. The feeding is strong and even. When I guide fabric under the presser foot, the layers do not wander. I can sew a long straight seam in cotton and it comes out flat and uniform edge to edge. I can move to linen without touching tension and still get a tidy line. The automatic tension system takes care of most of what I do. If I change to something slippery like a rayon challis or something thick like denim, I tweak presser foot pressure and it balances out quickly. The motor has plenty of pace. Long seams do not feel like a chore, and when I want to slow down around a corner or a curve, the control is smooth, not jumpy. At high speed, the sound is not whisper quiet. It is not loud enough to drown out a conversation, but it is a bit more noticeable than I expected, especially during marathon sessions. I do not consider it a deal breaker, just something I am aware of in a small room. The stitch quality is where this machine earns my trust. The straight stitch looks true and tight, and it stays that way as I cross thick seams or move from quilting cotton to a knit. Zigzag and stretch stitches land cleanly without chew marks on the fabric. Decorative stitches are sharp and consistent, and the built-in alphabets are surprisingly neat for labeling quilt blocks or adding a small name to a pouch. The one-step buttonhole function is one of my favorite parts. I place the button in the foot, line up the start point, and press the button. The machine measures and sews an even, dense buttonhole, and the results look like they came from a professional shop. It takes the anxiety out of finishing a shirt or a dress. There is a smart mechanical feature that has saved me time and a few needles. The throat plate conversion is a lever that switches the opening from a regular slot to a single hole for straight stitch work. When I piece quilt blocks or sew very light fabrics that like to get pushed into the plate, I flip that lever and the fabric stays on top where it belongs. The machine detects the plate change and disables zigzag, and it shows the change on the screen. I do not have to remember to double-check settings before I sew. That tiny bit of automation spares me from an ugly thunk and a broken needle. In my first few sessions, I set up a batch of cotton face masks as a warm-up. I wound several bobbins, clipped the elastic, and sewed through layer after layer without having to ride the tension dial. The seams were consistent, and the edges did not wave. I then pieced a set of quilt blocks from light quilting cotton. With the single hole plate engaged, every seam allowance fed straight, and the points matched more often because the starts and stops were crisp. I moved on to hemming a pair of denim jeans. I swapped to a heavier needle, adjusted presser foot pressure, and the machine climbed over the thick side seam without getting stuck. The stitch length stayed even where many machines start to compress. Finally, I tried free motion quilting on a small sandwich. Dropping the feed dogs takes a flick. With a darning foot on, I could sketch rounded shapes easily. The motor kept up with smooth power even when my hands were not very graceful. A more complete project told me the most. I made a linen button-down shirt with French seams. I cut everything the night before, then sat down with a mug of coffee and got to work. Shoulder seams first, then sleeves to the body with the inside finish clean thanks to that straight stitch confidence. I top-stitched the yoke slowly with the speed slider set lower and the lighting helping me see the guide line. Cuffs and collar came together without me fighting fabric drift. When it was time for buttonholes, I lined up markings, slipped the button into the sensor foot, and let the machine do its thing. Every buttonhole matched in size, and the edges were tight without snags. I then used the built-in alphabet to stitch a tiny initial on the inside placket. It looked tidy enough to leave in. That project showed me what it feels like to trust a machine. I could focus on pressing, pinning, and accuracy, and the machine did not distract me with surprises. Day-to-day use has a few small quirks. The knee lifter is useful when I need both hands on the fabric, but on my unit the motion feels a little stiff. It works, it just does not glide. I also noticed that the automatic needle threader prefers a slightly thicker thread and a perfect needle position. If I rush, it makes me redo the step. The machine is portable, but I would not call it light. After lifting it off a shelf a few times, I now plan its home base more carefully so I am not moving it often. On the positive side, that weight gives me stability when I am quilting or sewing fast. There are thoughtful touches I use constantly. The needle up and needle down control is a must for pivoting corners, and here it is responsive every time. The lock stitch secures seams neatly without a messy back and forth. The start and stop button is helpful for long, simple lines when my foot gets tired. The accessory compartment is built into the auxiliary bed, so my feet and bobbins live right there instead of disappearing into a drawer. Cleaning is straightforward. I pop off the plate, use the lint brush that came in the box, and get back to sewing in a minute. The lighting stays cool to the touch, and the brightness keeps eye strain down when I am working through the evening. What stands out most after a few weeks is how little I need to fuss to get repeatable results. I can move from a cotton tote bag with a zipper, to a knit tee neckline with a zigzag, to a delicate scarf edge, and the stitches look even. If I add batting and work through a quilt sandwich, the feed stays honest. If I switch to piecing with that single whole plate, the starts are clean and the fabric does not sink. I do not feel like I am being sold a feature set. I feel like the machine is quietly assisting, and I am deciding how my project should look. I see this fitting best in the hands of someone who sews weekly or wants to grow into bigger projects. Garment makers will appreciate the buttonholes, the consistent straight stitch, and the control at slow and fast speeds. Quilters will like the strong feeding, the easy plate change, drop feed for free motion, and the steady motor. If I only needed to hem pants a few times a year, this would be more than I need. But for a routine of clothing, quilts, and home projects, it has the right balance of convenience and quality. To wrap it up, I trust this machine. It makes me faster without making me sloppy. It lets me try new techniques without becoming a distraction. It has a few quirks that I learned to work around, and they do not outweigh the consistent stitch quality and the smart usability. If someone is stepping up from an entry-level model and wants a reliable partner for the long run, this belongs on the shortlist. If someone already owns a basic machine and feels ready for computerized control that still feels friendly, it is an easy recommendation from my experience. I will leave detailed information about the Juki HZL-DX5 in the comments for your reference. Thank you for watching.